Chapter 6. After supper, Cody drove back to his ranch, wondering what was going on with Rusty. She was obviously feeling very differently than she had the night they'd talked about getting married, and he wondered if she was softening toward him. He certainly hoped she was. The whole way, she chattered about baby names, and he was happy to hear her talk about things that affected them both and their lives together. "I think if it's a boy, I want him to have a C name, like you, but if it's a girl, I'd rather an R name like me." "Your real name doesn't start with an R, does it?" "Why don't I remember my wife's real name?" He frowned as he thought about it. "I'm not sure you've ever heard it. I'm not a fan of it, so I just go by Rusty, and have since I was a tiny girl." "Rusty suits you," he agreed, not caring at all about names at that moment. He was too busy wondering if he could talk his sexy little bride into bed. Maybe he should just kiss her. She seemed to react better to his kisses than she did to any words anyway. "I don't think I've ever been to your house," she said, frowning. "Sure you have. You were there for my birthday party when I was 12. You kept sneaking out of the party and going to the stables. I thought about following you and seeing if you'd go for a birthday kiss, but I had a feeling that would be a big mistake." He smiled. "And you were there the night you got drunk." She laughed. "I'd probably have just punched you in the face. I was in a violent phase when I was 12. She shook her head. "And I definitely should have remembered the night we got ourselves into this bind." "I remember. Weren't you the one who got suspended for punching a boy in the eye?" "That would have been me," she said with a grin. "My mother was proud, but my grandma was mortified." He laughed. "I remember how funny I thought it was, and I wanted to ask the boy what he'd done to get your hands on him." Her eyes narrowed. "You wanted me to punch you in the eye?" Sometimes she had to wonder about him. "Hey, touching is touching when you're 12. Cody grinned at her as he pulled into the driveway and parked his truck. "When you're in your 20s too, when it's the right girl." He unbuckled his seat belt. "I'm going to get my chores done. You can just go on in." He walked to the back of the truck where they'd stowed her suitcase. "I guess we should spend tomorrow moving you. You need to call in some favors from the cowboys you work with. I'm sure they'd all bring a load of boxes, and we could have you moved in an hour." "Do we need to move furniture?" he asked, not sure where they'd put it. "Nah. House is furnished. It's one of the perks of working on the ranch. Well, those few of us who got to have houses." She shook her head. "There's not so much, I can't just bring a few boxes every day after work. Or you could help out with it. Either way." "Okay, good. I don't know what I'd do with more furniture. I already have more than my share. And I don't like the idea of you moving yourself. Heavy boxes and pregnancy don't mix." Rusty nodded, walking to the front door. "Oh, wait." Before Rusty had a chance to put her hand on the doorknob, he'd scooped her up in his arms and carried her inside. "There. Don't tell anyone I never carried you over the threshold." He looked down at himself. "I'm changing before chores. You explore." He hurried off to the only bedroom downstairs, which was his. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs. The ranch had been in his family for several generations, and it was way too much house for him. Rusty stood in the middle of the living room, a bit bewildered. Cody sure was doing everything right, as if he'd chosen to marry her, and she hadn't just gotten pregnant. Of course, he'd had something to do with the pregnancy, so she was sure it made sense that he cared about the baby too. She looked around the living room and saw that everything was neat, but incredibly dusty. It was definitely a man's clean and not a woman's. She knew she wouldn't be able to stand it for very long, so she wandered into the kitchen, trying to decide what all she wanted to get done while he did his chores. When she got to the kitchen, she turned in a slow circle. The appliances didn't look like they'd been updated for a while, but that didn't bother her one whit. No, she liked to cook on older stoves. This one was electric, though, and she was pleased with that. For some reason, it was a lot harder for her to cook on a gas stove. After she heard the front door close, she dragged her suitcase into the room he'd changed in, presuming that would be the room she'd share with him. She'd planned to stick to her guns all week, and just that morning, she realized that choosing to love meant that she would need to meet him halfway, and that halfway was his bedroom. She changed into shorts and a t-shirt, not surprised when the shorts were loose in the waist. She'd lost some weight from how sick she'd been, but she knew she'd gain it back and then some in the coming months. When she was changed, she went looking for cleaning products. There wasn't much, but she found an old rag and went to work on the living room, dusting everything as quickly as she could. She truly felt like she was racing him to get as much cleaning as she could done before he finished his chores. She finished the dusting and was in the process of vacuuming the living room when he came back inside. "What are you doing?" he asked. Rusty sighed. "Can I tell you a deep, dark secret about myself?" "Sure. I'm a neat freak. If the room around me isn't clean, then I find it virtually impossible to be comfortable in it. I'm not saying the house didn't look good, because it did, but I need it a little bit cleaner than that." He laughed. "And why is that a deep, dark secret?" "Because people expect me to be okay with dirt. I'm covered in it often enough." Rusty shrugged. She hated when she was covered in dirt as well, but it was worth it to be able to work with horses as she did. "I guess that's true." He shook his head. "You can finish vacuuming, but then let's spend the evening together. I don't want you cleaning the whole house and ignoring me." She grinned. "I won't go that far. I assume you're working on the ranch tomorrow, and I'll clean then. After that it'll be easy to maintain. I wasn't sure how much I'd do tomorrow, but it sounds like you don't want me underfoot while you clean." As surprised as he was about the fact she was a neat freak, he realized he shouldn't have been. Her little house had always been neat as a pin, and he'd never given her warning he was coming over. "Well." She wrapped the vacuum cleaner cord around and pushed the vacuum back to the closet where she'd found it. She preferred her own vacuum where she just stepped on a button and the cord zipped into the vacuum, but she'd have that soon enough. As soon as she'd closed the closet door, she walked over to sit on the couch with him. Not exactly snugly against him, but close enough she could reach out and touch him and vice versa. He turned to look at her. "Movie?" She nodded. "What do you want to watch?" A movie would surely help her racing heart. Sitting this close to him, and remembering their kisses, and some of the other things they'd done together, well, it was a bit confounding how turned on just being close to him made her. Even with thinking she was in love with Aaron for all those years, he'd never made her feel like she felt with Cody. "I don't know. Superhero maybe?" She nodded. "I could go for a superhero movie. It's not a rom-com, but I guess all movies don't have to be." Cody gaped at her for a moment. "You really watch rom-coms?" "I laugh and cry at them. I love them so much." She shrugged. "I think it comes with being raised by two women. I guess we could watch one." "Nah, let's watch a superhero movie." "Good compromise." He navigated through his Netflix, which he'd signed up for just because she was moving in. He didn't want her to be lonely while he was out working ridiculously long hours after already putting in a full day at the dealership. The movie was in the first scene when she leaned toward him just a little. She wanted to be touching him. Really, she wanted to be kissing him. She wasn't certain what had gotten into her, but there was nothing she wanted more. He stretched his arm out and put it around her, pulling her close. When she didn't protest, he smiled. Maybe their marriage wouldn't be as distant as it had felt like it would be earlier. By the fourth scene, she'd somehow ended up on his lap, and she had no idea who had instigated the move, but she wasn't about to protest. His lips on her neck felt altogether too good for her to complain about anything. The movie wasn't even half over when he hit pause and pushed her onto the couch next to him, immediately leaning down and scooping her up into his arms. "You're sure carrying me around a lot." "I do know how to walk, you know." Rusty found she liked being carried more than she probably should. He smiled. "I know. You're the most independent woman I've ever met, and it just makes me want to take care of you and give you someone to lean on. Someone to carry you around like a newborn. You make absolutely no sense to me, but I suppose that's normal." She sighed, resting her head against his shoulder. He carried her into his room and laid her on the bed, aware that her suitcase was in the corner. "Were you planning on sleeping in here with me, even before we started kissing?" He liked the idea that she wanted to be around him enough that she'd planned this. Maybe she was as determined to make their marriage work as he was. She nodded. "My mother gave me some great advice on marriage, and I am going to do exactly what she said." He stripped off his shirt and his hands went to the button of his jeans. "Oh, yeah? What's that?" He knew he should be a lot more sexual when he stripped, but all he could think about was getting everything off of both of them so he could have his way with her. And she could have her way with him too, of course. Rusty shook her head. "Not telling." She closed her eyes as he pushed his jeans down, giving a squeak of surprise. "It's not like you haven't seen me naked, Rusty." He was amused by her reaction. "I know, it's just, well, it feels weird still." He chuckled. "I'll do my best to get you over that quickly." Leaving his boxers on, Cody joined her on the bed, his hands immediately going to the hem of her t-shirt. "Just a warning? I'm taking all your clothes off too." Her shirt was off, and his lips were on hers before she even thought to protest. She wrapped her arms around him, kissing him back with everything inside her. They'd made out for a good 30 minutes on the couch before adjourning to the bedroom, and she found she wanted him to speed things up a little. She didn't remember every detail of their night together, but she did remember how good it had felt to have him touching her and making love with her. She was ready for that again. Before she knew it, they were both naked and still kissing passionately. Her hands stroked all over his back as she silently begged him to end the torture. The deliciously wonderful torture that she loved every moment of. Finally, Rusty had enough, and she pushed him onto his back. She recalled she'd once thought about playing right-em cowgirl with him, and she was about to take matters into her own hands. Cody grinned up at her as he raised an eyebrow. "I guess you've had enough foreplay?" "More than." With a hand planted on either side of his head, she leaned down and kissed him, one knee on either side of his hips. When he entered her, she let out a gasp of pure pleasure. "I needed that," she whispered, slowly moving atop him and wanting to make it last forever, even as she needed to finish. When it was all over, she lay with her head on the pillow beside his and waited for her heartbeat to return to normal. "You should have just told me I was an idiot when I asked to delay our wedding night." "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted you to marry me. I wanted us to raise little Raisin together." "Raisin?" Cody shrugged. "I was thinking a little girl would be nice, and since your name is Rusty, Raisin works, right?" She groaned. "We'll work on names." "All right, but I really do think I like Raisin. Or maybe Rosebud." She kissed him. "Go to sleep. I can't listen to even one more of your suggestions without being ready to scream." He chuckled, holding her close. He started to tell her he loved her, but her eyes were closed, and he knew she wasn't ready. Not yet anyway. Asterisk. Rusty woke, for the first full day of married life, to a man who was nibbling her neck, trying to get her to wake up and pay attention to him. Cody whispered, "I thought you'd never open your eyes." She smiled, turning toward him, and then the nausea hit. She rolled away and out of bed, running for the bathroom, which she hadn't had time to clean yet. Oh well, it would need to be cleaned again when she was done anyway. She washed her face, brushed her teeth, and used a little of the mouthwash he had sitting on the counter. When she went back into the bedroom, Cody was looking at her like he was worried. "Did I hurt you?" "No. This morning sickness has been a bear. I'll feel better by afternoon." She hated that he'd seen her that way, but if they were going to share a room, then he'd see her run for the bathroom a lot. "I guess you're not making me breakfast in bed then?" he asked with a smile. At the mere idea of breakfast, she put her hand over her mouth, trying to ease her rumbling tummy. "I'm sorry. No. And I'll ask that if you do eat something, you make it something that doesn't smell at all. The doctor said I should feel better by about 12 weeks, but that means I have 4 weeks to go, and I'm not cooking in the morning until they're past. And I have a feeling that means no morning lovemaking until then either." He'd been all revved up, but he immediately put a damper on his passion as much as he could. There was no way she could do anything without being sick all over him, and he had a strange feeling that wouldn't make for an enjoyable experience for either of them. "I think you're right. I had no idea it would hit me that way. Sorry." And she really was. She looked forward to making love with him again, but at the moment, she needed to lie in bed and just breathe for a while. "Are you sure you're safe to keep working?" he asked. She started to nod, but thought better of it. "I'm positive. The doctor said as long as I wasn't riding too much or trying to work with a completely unbroken horse." She shrugged. "After 12 weeks, she doesn't want me riding at all, but I told Jim what's going on, and he's working around me." He frowned at her. "You don't have to work if you don't want to." Rusty sighed. "I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I wasn't working. I love my job. I've got a good amount of money stashed away from all the extra hours I've picked up over the years when others wanted off, but I just don't feel like I would be happy not working." "What about after the baby is born?" "I've thought about that. My grandmother has offered to watch him or her while I work. If I need her to, I'll probably take her up on it. There are good daycares in town, and I know Blake takes little Blossom to one that he loves, but I will have to think on it. I much prefer the idea of Grandma being my babysitter." "I can see that." He took her hand and held it in his. "We'll make sure little Raisin ends up in the best place for her. I'm not sure how I feel about you calling my unborn child Raisin." "Radish?" He got up and dressed, seeing her watching him. "Enjoying the show?" "I actually prefer it when you take your clothes off, as opposed to putting them on." Rusty wasn't afraid to admit what she liked to him. She was starting to like the intimacy they shared. He grinned. "What can I do to help you feel better?" She sighed. "Soda crackers? Water to sip on? I have some peppermint tea at home that's really helping me, but I didn't think to pack it in my suitcase. I don't know where my brain was. I'll get the crackers and some water. After my morning chores, I'll run over to your place and get your tea. You just need to give me your key and tell me where it is." "Oh, I didn't lock. I never lock." He frowned at her. "I hope that wasn't true when you were home." Of course, it was. It's not like the Cauldron Ranch is exactly overrun with criminals. "I guess not." He shook his head. "I'll get you those crackers." He was back a minute later with crackers and water. "You sure there's nothing else I can do?" he asked. "I'm sure." Rusty gratefully accepted the crackers. "I can usually make these stay down." "I don't like seeing you this sick," Cody told her, truly worried for her health. "The doctor said the worse the morning sickness, the better chance you have of carrying the baby to term. I hope she's right, because I feel like death. I feel like this is all my fault." "Not at all. I think we share blame pretty equally. It's not like I got pregnant all by myself, but it's certainly not your fault either. Don't worry. In about a month, I should feel better. If not, I'm going to go in and dance on my doctor's desk, begging her to fix me. He smiled. If it comes to that, I want to be there. You'll be the first person I invite. Chapter 7. Cody found his own breakfast, while Rusty lay propped up in bed, trying to get the queasiness to leave her alone. He kept popping into the bedroom. How are you feeling? I'm fine. Really? I just need to sit here quietly for a while. What can I get you? She frowned. I have a Kindle in my suitcase. She was going to have to figure out where to keep the rest of her romance novels that he wouldn't see them. She had no desire for him to be disillusioned by how girly she was when no one was looking. He dug through her things, pulling out the tablet. There you go. Happy now? Very. I just need something to do to keep my mind working. You go do whatever you would do if I wasn't here. I'm not going to be good company until I feel better in an hour or so. All right. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. I have 4 or 5 hours of work today, if you don't mind that. I'll get as much done as I can before lunch. Can you eat lunch? He asked. Yeah. I'll even cook. I can start cooking around 11 probably. So, be back by noon? You don't need to make anything fancy for lunch, he said. I usually just grab a sandwich. Okay, she said, planning to make something special anyway. She was choosing to love, and feeding him home-cooked meals was one way she could show him love every day. Within an hour, she was feeling better, and she got up and started to clean the bathrooms. There were 3, 2 downstairs and 1 upstairs. She cleaned them all, though the ones upstairs looked like they hadn't been used for a good long while. Then she lugged the vacuum upstairs and took care of the floors up there. She still wanted to do a good deep clean of the kitchen, but that wasn't going to happen until after lunch. After putting the vacuum up, she started some homemade mac and cheese with shrimp in it. She was surprised at how bare his cabinets and freezer were, so she pulled out a piece of paper and jotted down different things they needed to pick up later. He had very little in the way of staples, and she wasn't much for convenience foods. By the time he came in just before noon, she'd reorganized the kitchen cabinets and dealt with cleaning out the fridge, as well as making an inventory of food in the pantry and the freezer. She took the mac and cheese from the oven, and he took a deep whiff of the aroma. I cannot believe you can cook like this, and no one even knows. She shrugged. I have been cooking for a long time. It's going to be nice to be able to cook for someone else as well. You can cook for me anytime you want to, he said. I love to eat, but I hate to cook. I noticed that when I was doing an inventory of your freezer and pantry, she said with a grin. I'm going to want to do some grocery shopping this afternoon. I can do that while you're working though. He frowned. No, I'll go with you. We need to pick up your truck anyway. All right, she said softly. I'll make sure I have my list prepared before you're done. List? He asked. I usually just walk up and down all the aisles and throw what looks good into my cart. She smiled. My way will be more efficient. I promise. She took a bite of her mac and cheese. Tell me a few of your favorite foods, so I can have the ingredients on hand to make them. I like Wolf brand chili, and I usually melt American cheese on top. Disgusting. I'll put down chili, and we'll get the ingredients to make it. You'll like mine better than Wolf. Rusty was extremely confident in her cooking abilities, and she just hoped he was willing to give her a chance. He shrugged. I do a lot of sandwiches. Bologna and American cheese and white bread. She bit back her retort. She wanted to tell him he ate like a teenage boy, but she changed her mind. All right. What else? By the time he'd listed all of his favorite foods, she had ideas on what to cook to make the things he loved a little bit healthier. Not a lot, because he needed to be able to eat things he liked, but enough there would be a difference. He went back out to work some more while she finished cleaning the kitchen and making her shopping list. She was so excited to be able to cook for another human on a regular basis that she wasn't sure why she'd been hiding the fact that she could cook for so long. Rusty spent some time scoping out the upstairs bedrooms, deciding which would be best for a nursery when the time came for the baby to sleep upstairs. She knew she'd start by just putting him or her in a bassinet in their bedroom. When Cody came back in, she was ready to shop, and he looked around the house, and he could actually see the difference in the cleaning she'd done and the cleaning he'd done. It looks really good in here. Don't wear yourself out though. Oh, I won't. I like staying busy. She actually enjoyed grocery shopping with him, though she was constantly telling him he didn't need some of the things he wanted to throw into the shopping cart. I don't think we're going to need an entire case of ramen soup, she said. I will be leaving leftovers in the fridge for you or packing them for you to take to work. You will? He looked at her skeptically. I figured we'd each go our own way and you wouldn't feel like you needed to be all wifely. She laughed. Well, I do feel the need. Maybe it's the mothering instinct kicking in. Or maybe it was choosing to love him every day. Maybe so. On their way back, he dropped her off at the church so she could get her truck, and she followed him back to his ranch. When she got there, she saw he was putting the groceries away. Let me do that. He frowned. I don't mind helping. I'm going to want things where I want them, since I'll be the one doing the cooking, she said. All right. I'll watch then. She laughed. You do that. When everything was put away, it was time to make supper. I got just about all the chores that I wanted to do done today, she told him. I can concentrate on my husband and cooking for the next 2 days. That sounds good to me. Both sound good actually. I like when I get your attention, and I like when you cook for me. Rusty made a simple ground beef casserole for supper, but it was certainly better than what he'd been eating. After supper, he led her into the living room. Want to try and finish that movie we started last night? Are we actually going to finish it? Or end up in bed again? I'd be really happy either way, he said with a grin. Rusty laughed. Well, let's start it and see what happens. They didn't end up in bed, but they did end up making love on the couch while the movie continued in the background. She had a feeling they'd never be able to finish it. At least not while they were on their honeymoon. The following day, after lunch, she went with him to help him with his chores. In the stable, she helped him feed the horses, and she stopped and spent a moment with his mare. She didn't have the ability to talk to horses like Jim Cauldron did, but she was good at getting them to do whatever she wanted. It took her just a moment to realize the mare was limp. What happened to you, baby? She asked, kneeling down to look at the horse's foot. Oh, you have a rock in your shoe. I'll take care of it, Cody said from behind her. I don't want to risk you getting hurt. Oh, she won't hurt me. We're friends. She's cantankerous, he said. Not with me, she's not. Rusty determined that she'd spend some time working with the mare. Maybe they could get more work from her, and Rusty knew she'd get more pleasure from a trained horse. There, you're better now. She got to her feet and smiled at Cody. He shook his head. I don't know that I like you working with horses while you're pregnant. You're too stubborn, and you don't think about the repercussions of your actions. Rusty frowned. It's not your choice. I love to work with horses, and it's all I've ever done. Husband or not, you're not taking this away from me. She felt the anger building inside her that he even thought it was all right to tell her what she could and couldn't do. Cody glared at her. But you don't listen to reason. I do when the reason is actually reasonable. She closed her eyes and thought about what her mother had said. Choose love. I'll do my best to think before I act, but I can usually tell if a horse is skittish or if there's any danger. It's a sixth sense. I don't like it. Rusty took a deep breath. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust that I would never do anything to hurt our baby." He looked at her for a moment, not wanting to back down, but he knew she was right. She'd been working with horses her entire life. "All right. Just don't do anything stupid." "I wouldn't." She was pleased their first argument as man and wife had ended so easily, and she silently thanked her mother for the advice. She was one to fly off the handle quickly, but she needed to work on that if she wanted a happy marriage. She stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his lips. "I think you're pretty darn sexy. Have you ever thought of working without a shirt on?" He laughed. "I'm not sure how practical that would be. I'm doing a lot with fencing and animals all day. I'd get scraped up and hurt if I even tried." "I know you would," she said. "I just like the mental image it gives me." "Why is that?" he asked. "Because I'm obsessed with your shoulders," she said with a shrug. "I want to see them all the time. I keep picturing myself biting one of them." He shook his head, laughing. "I'm not going to complain about you picturing me shirtless. I'm picturing you shirtless right now too." She blushed. "I guess that's okay, since we're married." "It had better be. What's good for the mare is good for the steed and all that." "Yeah, sure." She wrapped her arms around him and just held on. "What do we need to do next?" "Oh, I have ideas." "I'll race you to the house," he said. "Race? Why are we racing to the house?" He raised an eyebrow at her, and while he was giving her an incredulous look, she started running. His legs were enough longer than hers that she deserved a head start anyway. She was laughing when she reached the house, and she heard his footsteps pounding behind her. "I won." He laughed, scooping her into his arms and carrying her inside. "I think in this game, we're both winners." Chapter 8. When Rusty went back to work on Wednesday, she was surprised to realize that she was already missing Cody. She wasn't sure what was up with that, but she was determined not to let it keep her from doing her job. Cody had the entire week off from the dealership, so he was working on odd jobs around the ranch, trying to catch up on things he'd let slip. Of course, he'd worked there 6 days the week before, so he'd have the time off with her. Before she left, she'd put a bowl in the fridge for him with nuking instructions, so he could make himself a healthy lunch. Okay, so he could reheat a healthy lunch. There was no way the man was making anything other than cold cereal as long as she was in charge of the kitchen. She got some ribbing from the guys when she got back, as she'd expected. "Let us know when you're pregnant and you need us to take over all your work," Rhodey said with a grin. When he saw the look on her face, his eyes widened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "So that's why you got married so fast?" She shrugged. "It seemed like the thing to do." "Are you two doing better?" he asked. "We are. Thanks for asking. My mother gave me some excellent advice and so far, it seems to be working." She avoided the topic with him for the rest of the day, not really wanting to go into the fact that she'd married because she was pregnant. It was bad enough that Rhodey had figured it out. No one else needed to know. At the end of the day, she was exhausted, but she looked forward to going home now. There was someone to go home to. She was starting to like this marriage thing. When she got home, Cody was nowhere to be found, so she started supper. While it was in the oven, she went into the living room to wait for the buzzer to sound, her Kindle in her hands. She was in the middle of the latest Aaron McLean book, and she was just getting to the good part. She couldn't wait to find out whether or not the couple would get together. Well, she knew they'd get together, but the how was always so different in Aaron's books. When she heard the door open, she put the book down and smiled at Cody, who was walking straight toward her. "How much time do we have before that amazing smell is ready to be eaten?" he asked. "About 20 minutes. "Why?" "Oh, I was hoping there was enough time for some newlywed activities in the bedroom, but I guess not." She laughed. "You're insatiable," Cody Walters. I never would have guessed that of you. I wouldn't have been with someone else, he said honestly. He kissed her quickly. I guess I can wait until after supper. I just wish mornings were a possibility. They're not. Ugh. It's all I can do to go to work and not throw up at the smell of the horse manure. You'd think with as much as I've been around it in my life, I'd be immune to the smell, but I guess not. Guess not, he said, smiling and resting his cheek atop her head. How was work? It was good. We got in a new gelding who needs to learn some manners. I wanted to work with him, but Jim is taking him on. Said he's just a little too feisty for me. Oh, and Rhodey figured out I'm pregnant by a look on my face. He's like a brother to me, and he just knows me too dang well. Cody smiled. At least it wasn't Aaron. I haven't seen or talked to him in more than a month. You need to stop worrying about him. He didn't respond to that. Knowing she was still in love with the other man bothered him a great deal. She may be his wife and carrying his child, but her heart would always belong to Aaron. How was your day? Rusty asked, needing a subject change from Aaron. The topic really didn't bother her any longer, but she could tell it bothered Cody, and that was the last thing she wanted. It was good. I got the fences in the north pasture mended finally. I've been wanting to move the herd there, but I haven't been able to. Now I can. Do you need some help moving them? Rusty asked. She didn't have a lot of ranch experience, but her experience with horses qualified her for just about anything on a ranch as far as she was concerned. No thanks. I'd rather you stayed away from the cattle until Raisinette is born. Raisinette? She's chocolate covered now. A definite improvement. Rusty shook her head. I don't know why I even like you. The man was insane. I wasn't sure you did, so I'm glad to hear it. She frowned. You can't tell I like you? I'm doing something wrong. Oh, you act like it, but I'm not sure how much of it is an act. She couldn't answer that without telling him she was choosing to love him every day. She'd have to up her game. Thankfully, the oven timer buzzed then, and she hurried into the kitchen to take care of it. Once supper was on the table, they ate it together, laughing about a story he told her about the fence he was working on. He'd mended the same fence with his father when he was in junior high, but he thought he was too cool to wear gloves with a barbed wire fence. When he'd cut his hand, his dad had just pulled out his first aid kit and taken care of it. After I was all bandaged up, Dad said, "Still too cool for gloves?" I said, "No, sir. It's too hot for gloves this summer, but nothing in this world is too cool for gloves." I swear Dad was trying his hardest not to laugh, but once he started, neither of us could stop. "You were silly even then," she said. "I remember you sitting behind me in English. You'd always ask me questions about whatever our assignment was, like you were too good to write it down. I could set my watch by your phone calls asking me what pages to read." He shook his head. "With every single phone call, I intended to ask you to be my girlfriend, and with every phone call I chickened out. That was 9 months straight." Rusty had a hard time believing he'd had a crush on her back then. "Yup. You were the girl of my dreams, but I found you incredibly intimidating." "Why? What was intimidating about me?" It wasn't like she was one of those girls in designer clothes who was always perfectly made up. Cody shrugged. "I think it was that you knew who you were, even back then. You didn't care what anyone thought of you, and you'd come to school with mud on your boots from working with horses all weekend, and when the other girls sneered, you just ignored them." "I'm glad it came across that way," she said. "I got my feelings hurt so much. I'd go home crying to my mom that the other girls were always making fun of me, and she'd tell me they were just jealous. I didn't believe it even then. Honestly, I think she was right. They were jealous. You had fun doing what you wanted to do. You and the 3 calendar girls you always hung out with. None of you were worried about designer clothes or makeup. You cared about horses. By high school they cared about makeup, Rusty said with a grin. I still haven't even figured out how to apply it. You don't need it. You're beautiful just like you are. She shook her head. I'm not. I'm just a girl who likes to play with horses. Your inner beauty shines through, and you light up a room as soon as you enter it. She laughed. This from the man I was absolutely horrible to? Cody shrugged. I understood that. You're not one to get drunk and wake up in some guy's bed. No, I'm really not. But if I haven't said it before, I'm really sorry for how I treated you after. She got up and rinsed off her plate, putting it into the dishwasher. When he came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, she leaned back against him. I've forgiven you for that 1,000,000 times over. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling a scent that was pure Rusty. I missed you while you were at work today. I missed you too, she said softly. She turned in his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. It was so weird. I love my job and everything about it, but all day, I'd look around and wish you were there. I know that's silly, but it's how I felt. He smiled. I like that idea. And I like you. A lot. His lips met hers, and he kissed her softly at first, but then the passion built up. Let's go to bed. I have to finish the dishes first. He groaned. Really? Really? I cannot stand walking away from the kitchen without the dishes done. It makes me crazy. Give me 5 minutes, and I'll meet you in the bedroom. He groaned. All right. 5 minutes. But know that I'm grumpy that you're making me to wait. She laughed. You can wait 5 minutes. She hurried through the dishes though, because she found she didn't want to wait even 5 minutes. Making love with him had become addictive. When Rusty finished, she found him sitting on the side of the bed, still wearing his jeans, but his boots were gone, and so was his shirt. She stood for a moment in the doorway, just admiring the picture he presented. Have I told you lately how much I love your shoulders? He laughed. I guess you have once or twice. He looked a little embarrassed that she talked about them so much. She walked to him and simply ran her hands along his bare shoulders, enjoying the strength she could feel under his skin. These are so amazing. I just want you to never wear a shirt, so I can stare all I want. Cody shook his head. I'm supposed to be admiring your body, not the other way around. Why's that? I'm not allowed to think you look amazing? Because I really think you do. She took a step back and stripped off her shirt and unsnapped her jeans. Have I mentioned how much I love this part of being married to you? She asked. Good, because it's certainly one of my favorites too. But then I love everything about being married to you. The hot meals. Waking up and seeing you sleeping beside me. Watching you run for the bathroom in the mornings when the morning sickness hits. You love it when I have morning sickness? She asked. You're insane. Not really. But I do love knowing that you're growing my baby. My little raisinette. Rusty sighed. We are not calling our child Raisinette. Just so you're aware. He pulled her down onto the bed with him and kissed her. At the moment, I don't care what we name our child. We'll discuss it later. Much later. And then he was kissing her in a way that made her forget all about baby names as well. Being married to Cody was like a dream come true, and she truly hoped she never woke up. It wasn't as much about choosing to love anymore. Her heart was doing it all for her. Chapter 9. As time went by, Rusty realized she looked forward to going home every evening in a way she never had before. Where she'd once lived for her work, now she just worked to live. Her real life started when she got home and got to spend the rest of her day with Cody. They spent time getting to know one another, playing games, and simply just being together. They'd been married about a month, and she was finally starting to feel better when they spent a Sunday with her mother and grandmother. Cody watched football while the three women worked together to make their Sunday dinner. "You seem really happy," Rusty's mother said, a smile on her face. "I am. Cody's really good for me. I believe we belong together." They certainly belonged together in a way she and Aaron never had. "We have our first sonogram on Friday." "Oh, that's fun. You won't be able to tell the sex yet, will you?" her grandmother asked. "I want to know if I need to knit blue booties or pink booties." Rusty shook her head. "You could compromise with yellow or green." "No, I'll wait. We'll be able to tell in about a month, but Dr. Jones wanted to do an early one. She likes to do 3 sonograms." Rusty shrugged. "I'm not about to refuse a peek at my baby." "I wouldn't either," her mother said. "Cody is going with you?" "Yes, he said he wouldn't miss it. He's already talking names and themes for the nursery. I'm not sure which one of us is more excited about the baby." Rusty couldn't believe how very happy she was to be expecting. She'd never seen herself as the maternal sort, but she read every day about where she was in her pregnancy and how big the baby would be. "Are you going to let me take care of the baby while you work?" her grandmother asked. Rusty shrugged. "I'm not sure yet. We don't want to burden you." "How could it be a burden for me to take care of my great-grandchild?" "We'll talk some more about it and make a decision," Rusty said. She really worried with her grandmother's age taking care of a newborn might be too much. When they finally had the meal on the table, Rusty went to get Cody from the living room where he was intent on his game. "Time to eat. Do your mother and grandmother cook as well as you do?" he asked softly. "Who do you think taught me? This is going to be a good meal." He rubbed his hands together excitedly. When they were all sitting, they said a quick prayer over the meal. "Are you going to make Rusty keep working after the baby is born?" her grandmother asked. Cody frowned. "I don't make her work. She chooses to. But I think she wants to stay home with the baby. Every time I offer to watch her, Rusty just says she'll think about it. You need to find a way for her to stay home." Rusty was shocked at her grandmother's words, but deep down, she knew they were right. She loved working with the horses, and she'd definitely want to go back to it when her kids were in school, but she wanted to be there for their first word. For that first step. Going back to work would mean missing all that. Cody looked at Rusty, watching her intently. If she really felt that way, why hadn't she said something? They'd have to have a real talk on their way back to the ranch. The subject was dropped for the time being, but Rusty couldn't quit thinking about it. What would it be like not to have to work every day? She knew that Cody was working 2 jobs, but if she could pitch in some of their savings and help with the mortgages, then maybe it would work for her to stay home. Later, as they made the drive, she brought it up to Cody. "I really do think I want to stay home after the baby is born. I could help you with the mortgages with money I have saved." He frowned. "We don't use your money to live on even now. Why would we need it then?" "No, I'll just keep working 2 jobs." She sighed. "But then the baby, and I will never see you. I barely see you during daylight hours now. How much is the mortgage?" He named a figure that was less than she had in savings. "Look, I lived at home for a couple of years while working at the ranch. I saved all but a quarter of my salary, which was for my truck payment and gas. I'm a saver. Even when I was living on my own, I saved a third of my salary. I have enough that we can pay off the mortgages, which I would feel like was a big investment in our future. Then if you kept working 2 jobs until the baby is born, we could save a big portion of that, and all of my salary." He frowned. "But I should be the one supporting us. Not you." "Why? The ranch has been in your family forever." That ranch will be paying our bills far into the future. If you let me put my money into it as well, then it becomes more profitable more quickly and our children will prosper. It makes sense. I guess it might. I'm going to think it over, and maybe we can sit down and crunch some numbers later. Sounds good. She leaned her head back against the seat. I'm so tired. You should nap. We'll talk about what we want to do once you've slept. Besides, he needed some time to think about it. He hated the idea of taking the money she'd worked so hard to save, but she was right about it being for their children's future. It was just hard to know what the right thing to do was. When he pulled up to the ranch, he glanced over at her and saw she was asleep. He smiled. Even in sleep, she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. It was hard to believe they were married and expecting their first child. He reached over and put his hand on her arm. Rusty, we're home. Her eyes were still half closed as she looked over at him. I like being home with you. Cody smiled, walking around the truck and helping her get down. The baby was making her a great deal more tired than usual. Once he had her tucked into his bed, he went to his desktop computer and sat down, looking through his bank account and the cash they had on hand. He hadn't really crunched numbers since shortly after his father's death. He'd had his check from the dealership direct deposited, and he'd never really looked at it. He knew in theory how much he made, but he'd never taken the time to study it. He knew he'd been doing well with the car sales, but he'd never realized just how well until that moment. When he looked at what he still owed on the mortgages, and then looked at what he had in savings, he knew that with just a little bit of help from Rusty, he could pay off the loans. They could have a good amount in savings again before the baby was born. Cody wanted to get up and celebrate and kick himself for not checking sooner, all at once. He'd kept himself on a tight budget for years, and though it was paying off now, he wouldn't have had to be so frugal if he'd just paid attention. He clicked a few buttons to do an online transfer to the mortgage and smiled when he realized he was down to owing less than $5,000. He had no problem letting Rusty pay that last bit, and then they were out from under that burden. When Rusty woke up, she walked into the living room, rubbing her eyes, but Cody wasn't there. She wasn't sure if he was in the house or out doing chores. Cody. In here, he called from his office. She followed his voice and found him sitting at his computer. He turned to her, and he looked 5 years younger. What's going on? You look happy. I am. I have just had my pay from the dealership direct deposited into a separate account I never looked at, and the money for the mortgage came out of there on autopay every month. I looked at it for the first time in a few years today. Rusty shook her head. You need to stay on top of your finances better than that. Why don't I take over bill paying and everything, so we can make sure we always know where we are? He sighed. Whatever you want, dear. What I'm trying to tell you is I've been making a ton more than I realized I was selling cars. I sat down and looked and I was able to pay off all but $5,000 of my mortgages. Rusty's eyes widened. And we can pay the rest with the money I have saved, and still have a good savings by the time the baby's born. She clasped her hands together excitedly. Oh, this is wonderful. He nodded. That's the conclusion I'd just come to as well. Are you sure you don't mind? Not at all. I'm thrilled to pay it, because that takes so much stress off of you. It does. Are you all right if I do keep working until the baby's born? I'll stop as soon as we have little Raisinette, but I'd like to have a good savings account to hold us through. She smiled. I probably have a year's worth of bills for our family saved up on my own, but whatever. I like the idea of having more. I don't want to have to stress when little cauliflower gets sick. And we won't have to now. He stood up and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet and spinning her. I felt so bad that you were marrying a man who was so deeply in debt, and now look at us. She laughed, holding his shoulders, thankful she was no longer suffering from nausea. She'd have had a problem with the way he was spinning her just a week before. We need to celebrate. How? He asked. I have no idea, but we'll think of something. Rusty thought for a moment. I know. I'll transfer some money to you, and we'll pay off the loan entirely. Wow. We're really rocking being financially responsible here, aren't we? We are. Rusty hurried from the room to get her bank account information. Let's do this thing. Cody laughed as she sat down at his computer, excitement in her eyes. They really were acting like an old married couple, and they'd only been married for a month. He couldn't express how good it felt. Chapter 10. When Rusty and Cody left for the doctor's office on Friday, they were both in a celebratory mood. I'm taking you out for supper after your appointment. I'd like that. I enjoy cooking a lot, but sometimes it's nice to go out for a change of pace. Where do you want to go? He asked. As far as he was concerned, the sky was the limit. She was carrying his child, their debts were paid off, and he was in love. What more could a man ask for in life? I'm craving Japanese. Oh, I haven't tried that new Japanese place. Does that sound good? She nodded emphatically. After, I want to stop at the grocery store. I need 6 or 7 gallons of cookie dough ice cream to make it through the weekend. 6 or 7 gallons? Have you lost your mind? Nope. I'm eating for 2. That's more like eating for a dozen. Sometimes that's how I feel, she said, grinning at him. He pulled into the parking lot of the doctor's office. Fine. We'll get you cookie dough ice cream, but I'm not sure about that much. Me neither, but at the moment, I want that much. They walked into the office, and she signed in, and the two of them waited in one corner of the waiting room, noting that everyone in the place was wearing a mask. Do you understand the whole mask thing? She asked Cody in a whisper. No clue, but it seems to be a trend these days. Look at that woman. Her mask matches her shirt. That's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Let's not join the mask fad. I like seeing your grin. He chuckled. Well, then I won't cover it up. If only you'd say the same about your shoulders. I can't run around in public with no shirt on. She thought about it for a moment. No, probably not. It could create a national disaster. He frowned. How could it create a national disaster exactly? You'd have flocks of women following behind you drooling. They would cause a spit slick, and people would fall and injure themselves. Then it would end up on the news, and other women in other cities would drool. Think of the flooding. Cody laughed, shaking his head. You have a very vivid imagination. Only when it comes to seeing you naked, she said with a wink. I think that's known as memory. Rusty grinned at him, glad they were the only people on that side of the waiting room. When her name was called a moment later, they both stood up to go back. They heard the heartbeats, which thrilled both of them, but they got really excited when they saw 2 little blobs on the sonogram. The doctor patiently explained that each one was a fetus. 2 babies. Rusty felt a bit overwhelmed for a moment, and tears filled her eyes. 2 babies would definitely be double the work, but also double the love. Twins. She looked at Cody, who was grinning wider than she'd ever seen. We can't see the gender yet, can we? He asked. The doctor shook her head. No, not yet. Give it another month, and we'll be able to tell then. The doctor wiped all of the goo off Rusty's belly. Let's schedule you again in a month. I'll want to watch you a little closer, because it's twins, but you're young and healthy. I don't foresee any problems. After making another appointment, they left and went to the truck. Cody couldn't seem to stop grinning. It's just like you not to do things the normal way, and feel like you have to have 2 at once, he said. Rusty laughed. I would blame twins on you. Why me? He asked. It's not like I'm going to blame myself, she said with a laugh. Of course. He shook his head at her, then leaned over and kissed her softly. Twins. Twins. All the way to the restaurant, they didn't speak, both lost in thought. She couldn't help thinking about all the diapers they'd go through and how her mother and grandmother would react. They'd both been happy about one baby. They should be walking on air when they found out it was two. At least it's not triplets, she said. I don't want people licking their fingers when they see my babies. Do you think they'd do it for a family other than the Cauldrons? Some people just seem to think the family is spooky. Rusty shrugged. I know they would. The Calendar family has a set of triplets, and they've always had to deal with it. I don't think the stigma extends to the entire family there though. After supper, they headed to the grocery store, and holding hands, they headed for the ice cream aisle. I need at least 3 gallons of cookie dough, she told him. And maybe a couple of rolls of cookie dough, so I can have extra cookie dough in my ice cream. Oh wait. I want to get cookie dough and add it to chocolate marshmallow ice cream. Change of plans. Cody laughed. Whatever you want, little mama. Little mama? A voice asked, and Cody looked away from his glowing bride for a moment to see Aaron standing in front of them. Rusty looked up and looked stunned for a moment. It was the first time she'd run into Aaron since she'd married Cody. We just found out we're expecting twins, she said with a smile. Wow. Twins. Congratulations. Aaron seemed genuinely happy for them, and then his wife popped around him. Twins? You need to eat your alfalfa sprouts then. They're really good for a woman while she's gestating. Rusty wasn't even sure what to say to that. I'll take that under advisement. She turned back to the ice cream and found the chocolate marshmallow. Pulling out 3 gallons, she handed 2 to Cody. We should have grabbed a cart. Already the other couple had slipped her thoughts as she headed for the refrigerated cookie dough. This is going to be so good. I can't wait to dig in. Cody just nodded, following along behind her. He didn't say much, but he seemed upset. She tried to get him to talk the whole way home, suggesting names like Raisinette and Radish to get him laughing, but nothing worked. I guess if we have 2 boys, we could name them Carrot and Cauliflower. Sure, he said. When they got home, she carried one of the gallons of ice cream and the bag of cookie dough into the house, suddenly losing her appetite. She didn't know what she'd done to make Cody so distant, but she needed to figure it out. She put the food away, and then went into the living room. Cody was lounging on the couch, and Rusty stood looking at him for a moment before she walked over and sat beside him. Are you all right? She asked. Sure. She could tell by his tone of voice that he wasn't though. Cody, tell me what's wrong. He sighed. It was just a bit of a blow to see the way you looked at Aaron. I thought we were making good strides in our relationship, and to see you all but fall at his feet hurt. All but fall at his feet? I don't know what you saw, but it certainly wasn't that. Rusty shook her head. I barely thought about Aaron at all since our first night together. You don't have to lie to me, he said. She sighed. I don't know what I need to do to convince you. I realized a long time ago that what I felt for him was nothing more than infatuation. When compared with the real love I feel for you, it was absolutely nothing. Now you want to convince me that you love me? He asked. I have a really hard time believing that. The look you gave him. That look was a why did I ever think you were all that and a box of chocolates. Nothing more and nothing less. He was out of my mind a minute later and I was thinking about cookie dough and chocolate marshmallow again. He studied her for a minute. Really? Really? Did you not see how excited I was today when we discovered we were having twins? I want 2 babies, but only because you're the father. I never would have been happy with Aaron. I can see that now. I don't even know why I thought I would be. A slow smile crossed his face. You really love me? I really love you. What do I need to do to convince you? Strip naked and do an interpretive dance? Would you? That would really make me happy if you don't mind. She crossed her arms over her chest. Not happening. Freak. He laughed, pulling her down into his lap. I've loved you for so long, and I never thought you'd notice me. You mean, since the night we slept together? Is that why you were so insistent that I talk to you? No, I mean since the first day of junior high when you walked into my class, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, because you were an angel in my eyes. She shook her head at him. Now I know you're kidding. No, I'm really not. I daydreamed about you every day all through high school. When I brought you home that night, I planned to put you in my old bedroom, even though I couldn't join you there. I thought it would be like making all my teenage daydreams come true. She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. You're crazy, you know that? I do know that I'm crazy about you. She sighed happily. So, we're married, in love, and having twins. Does life get better than this? Yes. We're out of debt. That too. Wow, it's like all the stars lined up just right for us, isn't it? Rusty pressed a kiss to his lips. I sure do love you, Cody Walters. Not as much as I love you, Rusty Walters. Wanna bet? She asked. Not particularly. I don't care if I win or lose this one, because either way means you love me. He held her close, knowing that he could finally be happy. Rusty loved him. Epilogue. Rhodey hummed to himself, Beethoven's Für Elise, as best he could manage, as he tightened one of the connections under the hood of the big pickup truck. It was quiet and cool here in the vehicle barn, and he was glad for the peace. Trucks and engines had always just felt right to him, no matter what his family thought of his chosen career, and he was glad he'd found a place here at Cauldron Valley Ranch. There wasn't a lot of work for him, even counting the ranch's fleet of vehicles, but he was a simple man who didn't require much, and his room at the ranch bunkhouse was free. What else could he need? This particular truck was one Rusty was going to be using in the coming months, and he wanted to make sure it was running perfectly. She didn't often head out on the range with the horses, but now that she wasn't riding, he wanted to make sure she was taken care of. He was happy for her and Cody, happy she'd figured out what she wanted from life and quit mooning over Aaron. Oh, Aaron was a good guy, but Rusty was genuinely glowing, carrying Cody's baby, and even Rhodey could see the love between them. He was working his way through the closing bars of the song when his phone buzzed. Wiping his hands on the towel he'd shoved in his pocket for just that reason, Rhodey trotted over to the stool where he'd left his phone and wallet. It was Blake Littlelight. Hey, Blake, what's up? Hey, Rhodey. His friend sounded tired. But then, with a baby and a new wife, he sounded tired a lot. We've got a proposition for you. We? Rhodey's brows rose. It was Lainey's idea, but Arya suggested I call you. Well, I've never been propositioned by two lovely married women before, but lay it on me. Oh, haha. Blake sounded like he was rolling his eyes. Look, Lainey, and the others, have a younger sister, Didi. She's been in South Carolina, caring for their great-aunt. Well, Aunt Gertie just recently passed away. Oh. I'm sorry, Rhodey said, when his friend paused. I'll pass that on. On the other end of the line, Blake sighed. Didi inherited an RV, and apparently it'll take a week or two to get everything packed up and the house sold and all that. But she's got no way to get the RV and all the stuff back to Montana. Lainey suggested you might be willing to drive it for her. Rhodey looked around the vehicle barn. He was mostly caught up with work. If he left, and something broke, the Cowboys could just take out one of the other ranch trucks until he got back to fix it. So he shrugged. Yeah, I think I could manage that. You've driven RVs before? Rhodey clucked his tongue. I don't think you could come up with something with wheels I haven't driven. His friend chuckled. Tractor? Yep. Tractor trailer? Sure. I spent some time trucking livestock. Blake hummed. A bulldozer. That has treads, but yep, I spent a summer in college working on a construction crew. Chuckling again, Blake gave up. Alright, I'll tell Lainey you passed my muster. She can give you the details if you want to come over for dinner one day this week. Sure. Just to confirm, you want me to fly to South Carolina, pick up the RV, and drive it back? Yep. Didi will pay you, and she'll be traveling with you. Rhodey was silent for a moment. Traveling with someone? That would be new. But still, the thought of the open road, a reliable vehicle beneath his feet, and a week's worth of road trip snacks, well, he couldn't pass that up. Sure, he repeated. I'm your man. I'll stop by tonight and Lainey can tell me all about this sister of hers. And who knows? Maybe a road trip with a stranger could be fun.